Joshua chapter 11, if you have a Bible, I invite you to open up with us the 11th chapter. We're coming to the end of the major conquest that Israel had taken on as they enter into the promised land. And think about this, guys. What an adventure it's been. When we begin chapter 12, we're going to kind of review all of the battles that they had won. And then we get to chapter 13. It's going to talk about the land that is going to be divided up to the different tribes of Israel. And one of the things you see is all the major victories had been won by the time we get to the end of chapter 11. And now it's going to be the individual tribes having to go and live out what they had just learned. Faith in action. And one thing that I've realized in my own life, and I've realized, watching the Lord work over the last 30 years of walking with Him, is that when we have the opportunity to see God work and God move in someone else's life, then it builds our confidence in God working in our own lives. Faith is contagious. Faith is something when you see it in action, you're going, man, if God can do that for them, He can do it for me. And it's something that the children of Israel are learning. They're learning to walk by. Think about what's happened over the last 40 years of the life of the children of Israel. They get to the edge of the promised land, and then 12 men go in and they spy out the land, and they come back and they brought fear rather than faith. They says, look, those guys are giants. We can't take them. And all of the rest of Israel begin to fear, and rather than going in, they retreat. And God gets angry because of their disbelief with them. And He says, okay, if that's what you want to do for the next 38 years, because they had already been gone from Egypt for 2 years, for 38 more years, you're going to walk around the desert and you're going to learn faith. And they had to learn how to trust God for their provisions, their food, their water. They were going to have to learn how to trust God against the little battles that they would encounter and all the things that they would have to go through. They would have to learn what to be content, and then learn how to walk by faith. And it's not until that generation passes that the next generation is now going to go into the promised land. They get to the end of the Jordan River, and then they're told, you know what? You're going to get the Ark of the Covenant. You're going to put it on your shoulders. The priests are going to lead you guys. And then he's going to walk into the water. And it's not until he steps into the water that the Jordan's going to part. Faith. Because they're going to have to learn that, you know what, it's not by what you see, it's what God said that you live your life by. And so they walk, and as soon as they touch the water, the robes hit the water, it says that the water immediately parted, and all of Israel walks across on dry land. Because God was teaching them how to walk by faith. They get to the other side, and God says, okay, now that we're in the promised land, everyone's got to get circumcised. All your men of war are going to get circumcised. And that meant that they were vulnerable, that the enemy would attack them as they were healing from their circumcision. And they had to what? They had to trust the Lord. Faith. This whole journey. And what's incredible, not only that, they go around Jericho, and we see them go to Jericho, and God tells them, look, you're going to walk around Jericho 7 days. It's one time every day, except for the seventh day. You'll walk 7 times, and you're going to shout, and then I'm going to bring a great victory. And they do exactly what the Lord told them. They shout, and the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. And they are once again learning what? Faith and obedience. And what's incredible, not only do they have an incredible victory, but they were told that everything in Jericho was to be dedicated to the Lord. They weren't going to take any of the gold or the silver, but there was a man amongst them by the name of Achan who decided, you know what, I want some of that gold, I want some of that silver, and there's an Egyptian cloth there, and I'm going to take the cloth and I'm going to keep it for myself, and he hides it under his tent. And then they go and they're going to fight against a next city, which was Ai, a smaller city. And they go, you know what, it's just a small city. We don't have to, take all the troops. We'll just send a small contingency of our troops to go and into Ai. And then they go to Ai and they're defeated. And Joshua's all bummed out. He's like, Lord, you brought us over here to die. And, everyone's going to hear that we got defeated. And here's this little tiny city and we can't even beat them. I mean, what's going on? And God goes, Joshua, stop complaining. Get off your feet. The problem is that there's sin in the camp and you never sought me before you went into Ai. What are they learning? Even in their failures, they're learning what? Faith. Even in their failures. They have to deal with Achan. God exposes Achan's the guy who's, brought this reproach upon the nation, and they take Achan, they stone him, and they burn everything with fire, his own sons, his daughter, the whole family, his wife, everybody. And then God tells them, okay, now you're going to go to Ai, and I'm going to give you the instructions on how to go to Ai, and how you're going to win this battle. And then they go and they defeat Ai. And then they come to Gibeon, and Gibeon deceives them, and they make a covenant with Gibeon. And, in this whole thing, again, they didn't seek the Lord, right? God's teaching them again, you don't seek me, you're going to get duped, you're going to get deceived. And so sure enough, man, they get deceived. And then Gibeon goes back, and Joshua and the children go, what did you guys do? You guys lied to us, man. That's not even right. But they honor their covenant because they made a covenant with them. They honor it. And then what happens is that they go into their normal life, but there's 5 kings that decide, we're going to go attack Gibeon because they made a covenant with Israel, and then we'll kill Gibeon, and then we'll go after Israel. That was their plan. And Gibeon calls and says, hey, Joshua, come and help us. And Joshua goes, and the Lord says, you know what, I'm going to give all of those kings into your hands. And they fight a battle, and again, they have great victory because they're trusting the Lord. And I think sometimes, we can read these books, Old Testament books, you kind of go, well, it's just a lot of history lesson. But I don't believe God gave us these books just to be history lessons. I think it's laying out history. But it's more than a history lesson. It's so that you and I can see what happens when a people obey God. And then when we walk by faith, what God's capable of doing if we'll trust him. Watch, I want to ask you to turn real quick to what? To 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And I'd like to revert to this passage often because I think it kind of puts everything in perspective as we're going through the Old Testament passages. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Look at the 11th verse. The first 10 verses is talking about Israel and all the things that Israel had experienced when they were coming out of Egypt, right? And then look at verse 11. Now, all of these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. Because look, all these things are written for what? For your admonition, so that you would learn what it means to walk with God. That's why God gave us his word. And especially as we're looking at God in the Old Testament, man, one of the things you learn is that all of this was to be a picture for us of what the Christian life is like. Because we're in a war. We're in a spiritual battle. And there's constantly, this opposition that we face. Not so much. We're not out there with machetes and guns or that's not the battle we face. You see, the battle that you and I face is a spiritual battle. And you can't win a spiritual battle with physical elements. You can't do it with a knife. You can't do it with a gun. You see, the only way you can win a spiritual battle is in the spiritual realm. That's how you win the spiritual battles. And it's incredible because God allows us to go through these things so that we don't put our confidence in ourselves, but we put our confidence in him. God is, if you put your confidence in yourself, understand something, man, you will be taken out. But if your confidence is in the Lord, man, you will have victory in your Christian life. Paul would tell young Timothy, and I'm going to read a couple passages from Timothy, just to kind of get perspective here. 2 Timothy chapter 2, again, if you'd like to turn there, you're welcome to. 2 Timothy chapter 2, the first verse. Watch what he says. He says, you therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things you've heard from me among many witnesses, commit these things to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You therefore must endure hardship, watch this, as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. And no one who's engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And also, if anyone competes in athletics, he's not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. The hard-working farmer must be first to partake of the crops. Consider what I say, watch this, and may the Lord give you understanding in these things. He says, look, if you're going to be enlisted into the army, you're there to please your commander. And you've been enlisted. You're part of the army of God if you're a Christian here this evening. But not only that, he says you got to play by the rules. You know, you don't go into any kind of athletic match and then go, well, I'm not going to play by the rules. I'm going to cheat. You get disqualified. God's saying, hey, you got to play by the rules. And God's the one who teaches us how to live and how to walk according to his word. And it's cool because you're looking at Joshua and he's telling us, look, this is what the Christian life is like. This was written for our admonition so that you and I would learn the lessons, so that we would see the hand of God, so that we'd be able to, go into this arena that God's called us into in the spiritual battle, and that we would be able to have victory. Now notice what happens as we begin the chapter. We're looking at chapter 11. Look at verse 1. We'll read verses 1 through 5. And it came to pass, when Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, the king of Ashshaph, and to the kings who were born in the north in the mountains, or who were from the north in the mountains, in the plains of the south of Chinnereth, in the lowlands and the height of Dor in the west. To the Canaanites, the east and west, and the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and the termites. No, it doesn't say that. Every time I see those ites, I got to in the mountains, and the Hivite, below Hermon in the land of Mizpah. So they went out, they and all of their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is in the seashore in multitude, and with very many horses and chariots. Wow. And when, look at verse 5, these kings had met together, they came and they camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Can you imagine? It says all of the kings of the land are gathering together, and it's all the northern kingdoms. He says it was so many that it was as much as the sand of the seashore, and they had, a multitude of horses, and they had a multitude of chariots. Now, a chariot in that day was like a tank in our day. You don't sit there with your sword and a chariot's coming at you. You run. These guys were, the ones that would come and they would just demolish everyone. And he says it was just like this army that was so massive that Israel didn't stand a chance. And what's incredible, is you look at the battle that you and I face. If it's going to be up to just us to win the battle, then, this is what I know, that I don't stand a chance. And I think sometimes you look at our world and you're like, man, we don't stand a chance. It seems like everyone's against us, man. Hollywood, the media, you look at the education system, you look at, how many of the arenas, man, our culture, our courts, You know, you can sit back and go, man, it's all, you look at the impossibility of us having victory and us doing what God's called us to do. And it seems like, man, all the odds are against us. And that's true unless God is the one who's fighting the battle for you. We don't stand a chance in our universities. We don't stand a chance in the media. We don't stand a chance in our society unless what? Unless God fights the battle for us. And it's not just the world that's against us. Think about this. We have the devil who's constantly trying to destroy us. And then who do we have? We got our own flesh. Those are our three enemies. The world, the devil, and the flesh. And you look at the odds, you're like, man, how am I going to stay in my Christian walk? And how am I going to have a Christian testimony if, man, everything's against me? But if God's for you, then who can be against you? Right? If God's for you. And what's incredible is you look at this whole passage, look at verse 6, and here's the cool thing. Watch what he says in verse 6. But, all of the armies are there, but the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. He goes, all of these things are good. All these things are against you, Joshua. But let me tell you something. I'm going to destroy all of them. I'm going to win this battle. Remember what happened when they didn't enter into the promised land. Why didn't they do it? Because of fear. Fear. And think about it. I'll guarantee you, man, that at this point, they saw the odds against them, and the first inclination is to what? Is to fear. That's why God has to come and tell them, Joshua, do not be afraid. I don't think God just says things for the fun of it. I don't think God just kind of goes, hey, what do I tell Joshua today? I know, I'm going to tell him not to be afraid. No. God tells Joshua, don't be afraid, because he was afraid. He's there going, no, man, we did it now. This is it. Say goodbye to your children tonight. We're not going to make it till the morning. Really, that really is what's happening in Joshua's heart. That's why God comes and says, Joshua, don't be afraid. Because tomorrow or on the same time, I'm going to destroy every one of them. Now, when God tells you that he's going to fight your battle for you, you can choose to continue to live in fear, or you can live in what? In faith. And Joshua chooses to live in faith. He's going to trust the Lord. And you know that because watch what happens, man. I love this whole picture here. Look at verse 7. So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom, and they attacked them. Notice what happened. It was a preemptive strike. They went in there. These guys are battling against. You know what? Let's go take them out. Did you guys watch what happened yesterday in the news? Israel saw all the Iranians forces were there was a lot of movement, and they knew that they were going to try to attack them, and so Israel went and they sent some bomb preemptively. They went and bombed a bunch of their they bombed their base and blew up a bunch of their artillery and the missiles that they were going to shoot at Israel. And it's interesting. If you ever watch Israel, man, they're always preemptively striking the enemy. The enemy comes to fight against them, and they just go, okay, want to fight? And then blows them up. But today, the Iranian guards shot 20 missiles into Israel, and their missile system blocked several of them. I understand some of them got through, but they didn't hit anything. But things are escalating there. Things are, you just know whenever they go and attack Israel, hold on. Because Israel's going to come back and preemptively strike some more. So, but you just realize that God was giving them wisdom on how to handle the battle. So they go in and they go, hey, we're going to go meet, they're going to come against us. And then when they weren't expecting it, they went against them. And notice what happens in verse 8. And the Lord delivered them into the hands of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to greater Sidon and the brook of Mizrapheth in the valley of Mizpah eastward. They attacked them until they left none of them remaining. So Joshua did to them, check this out, as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. Wow. I love that, the scripture just says, look, here's what was happening. This is what God did. And then this is what Joshua did. And you see that God and Joshua are working together in unison. Now he's learning faith and obedience. Joshua, I'm going to win this battle for you, but here's what you need to do. You hamstring their horses and you burn their chariots. Why would God tell them to do that? Hamstring their horses, burn their chariots. I mean, you would think, man, wouldn't anybody that is able to overtake the enemy's horses and to overtake the enemy's chariots, wouldn't that be a valuable asset in the battles that are to come? Everyone would think, man, we got tanks. Now, when the next enemy comes to fight against us, we'll be able to run them over with tanks. But here was the deal. God didn't want them to trust in their tanks. God wanted them to trust in him. And I think there was the lesson here, guys. God was saying, you're not going to put your confidence in horses, and you're not going to put your confidence in chariots. David in Psalm chapter 20 verse 7 says this, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. I like what Psalm 147 verse 10 says. He says, he does not delight in the strength of the horse, nor does he take pleasure in the legs of a man. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him and in those who hope in his mercy. And then here's another one, Isaiah 31 verse 1. It says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they're very strong, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor do they seek the Lord. And here's what's happening. God's going, look, you're not going to take the enemy's chariots and the enemy's horses and think now we have a military power that we can go and defeat the enemy with. God's going to say, you're going to burn the chariots. You're going to hamstring the horses so they're not good for war. They're good for giving kitty rides to the kids around the block. But they're not going to be, fierce horses that are going to go into battle for you anymore. And it says this is what's going to happen, man. You're not going to put your confidence in man. You're going to put your confidence in God. And I think that's a continual lesson that God is teaching the children of Israel. You're going to have to put your confidence in the Lord. Because what is God looking for, man? He's looking for what? Obedience and faith. That's what he's looking for in your life, and that's what he's looking for in my life. That we would obey him and that we would trust him. And God is teaching the children of Israel, how, this was going to be the norm for them. There's still battles ahead. They're still going to have to go into several other campaigns to defeat the enemy. But those campaigns were going to be won by God providing for them, not man's power or man's confidence. And I love the whole picture. Now notice what happens there in verse 10 now. So Joshua turned back at that time, and he took Hazor, struck its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of those kingdoms. And they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. And he burned Hazor with fire. So the cities of those kings and all of their kings, Joshua took and he struck them with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them as Moses, a servant of the Lord, had commanded. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. All the spoil of these cities and the livestock and the children of Israel took as booty for themselves, and they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing, as the Lord had commanded Moses, his servant. So Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. I love it, because what does he do? Now think about who had brought all the victories. The Lord. But who's the one that's getting the acclimates for it? Joshua. Right? Guys, there's a picture for us. Think about this. God's telling us, so you just obey me and I'll do all the work for you. And then when you get to heaven, you get the rewards for your obedience, even though God did all the work. It's incredible. That all that God's asking you and I to do is just walk by faith and just walk in obedience. And then when it's all said and done, you're going to get the benefits of it. You're going to get your rewards in heaven. You're storing up your treasures in heaven. And all you've done is trust me. You see, that's what God's desiring for the Christian life, is that we would walk with that kind of confidence and that kind of faith. They're now getting the benefit. Now think about this. They go in there and all of the gold, all the silver, all of the livestock, everything now is now property of the nation of Israel. And God's going to tell them, at one point he says, look, I gave you land you didn't earn. Buildings you didn't build, vineyards you didn't plant. You're going to get livestock that you didn't even care for. I'm just going to give all of those things to you. All you do is walk by faith. You trust me. You seek after me. And Joshua and the children of Israel are learning the lesson, man. And they're, think about it. Those are hard lessons. They're hard lessons. Because there's a lot of times what's happening is that you and I, guys, we're walking in this world and we have to decide, am I going to put my faith in what man says or in what God says? Am I going to put my confidence in my wisdom or in God's wisdom? What's going to rule over my life? In my own desires, my own flesh, my own passions, the things that I want? Or am I going to surrender those things and say, God, I want to follow your word and your truth? And there's some of those things that, we wrestle with. We, just constantly. Walking with the Lord for 30 years, I still have to wrestle with my flesh. I still have to wrestle with my anger. I can be driving down the street just worshiping the Lord, a nice, Christian song on, singing away, and then someone cuts me off and I want to kill him. It's crazy. And you just like pull over, you're like, and you're just like, what are you thinking? What? It's just this flash. It's crazy how much power it possesses. And then you got to come back and say, okay, God, forgive me. I blew it. I hope they don't come to church Sunday, whoever that was. All right. And you realize that this old man constantly is gnawing at you, and you got to constantly bring it to the cross. You constantly got to go, God, help me. God, forgive me. God, change me. And it's the battle that we're in, and it doesn't end. I was hoping it would end, okay, maybe after I'm walking with the Lord for 10 years, then it'll end. I get the 10 years, like, no, okay, maybe 20. Right now I'm going on 30, I'm going, maybe 40. And you realize that it doesn't end. This battle is continually raging. That we got to constantly come back and say, God, I want to walk in obedience and I want to walk in faith, but I can't do it on my own. I don't even have it in me to do it on my own. I need you to do it for me. I need you to bring victory over this thing that holds me, whatever that vice is in my life. Because it's only God's grace, it's only his hand that brings those victories. And some of those victories take longer than others. Some of them, I know there were certain things that immediately I got saved and I didn't get drunk anymore. I didn't smoke dope anymore. There was none of those things that once held me. But I realized that there was a whole other host of things that I had to be changed. I had to be transformed. My attitude, my heart. And it's this constant learning to walk with God. And the children of Israel are in this journey, man. 40 years later, they're still learning. 40 years walking the desert, they're still learning to walk with God, to trust God, to obey God. And you get to this point where it looks like they finally, where they're just going, look, Joshua did everything that Moses laid out. The children of Israel are going into the battle, not running in fear, but walking in confidence. And then you realize, as you're watching this whole thing, God is reminding them, I'm the one who's going to win this victory. I'm who's going to bring this battle. Look at verse 16, man, another incredible passage. Look at verse 16. Thus Joshua took all this land, the mountain country, all the south, all the land of Goshen, this lowland, the Jordan plain, the mountains of Israel and its lowlands, from Mount Halak and the ascent of Seir, even as far as Baal Gad and the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. He captured all the kings and struck them down, and he killed them. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. Notice, I think sometimes we think, we just win that battle and it's over. No, it was a long time they were battling. It was a long time, and that battle doesn't end on this side of heaven, guys. The battle doesn't end until we get into glory. And it's an incredible, because he says, look, all of these things that God had established, all these things that God had brought victory upon, that the children of Israel were there warring and battling these things. Now, verse 19. It says, there was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle. Now, we're going to find out as we're going through the rest of the book that he's talking about the major cities that have now been brought under the subjection of Israel. There's going to be some highlands that we're going to see some of the Caleb have to go in, and there were still enemies out in the highland. And there's some of those areas that Israel never took because the individual tribe never took all the land that was entrusted to them or given to them. But for the major part, they had went into the promised land, and by the time we get to the end of chapter 11, they had wiped out all of the major enemies that had come that they were to wipe out. And they did it just as the Lord had instructed them to do it. Now, notice verse 20. Gibeon is the only one that made peace with them. Watch the reasoning here. And this is an incredible passage. He says, for it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, it wasn't that God was hardening their hearts without a reason. As a matter of fact, remember Rahab when they went to the first battle at Jericho? There was one Gentile woman who she had faith. And because Rahab the harlot had faith, she was the one rescued from that whole battle. her and her family and her, all of her relatives were rescued because she was willing to trust the Lord. It was faith. And everyone else in Canaan had the opportunity to, by faith, trust the Lord. But what had happened, they had become so vile against the Lord. Their idolatry, you can go and if you get a chance to go and study the Canaanites, they were some of the most wicked, sexually deprived people on the face of the earth. And God had told Abraham, 400 years earlier, he says, you know what, Abraham, I'm going to give you this land, but not until the sins of all of the ites, Canaanites, Hivites, Jevites, all of the ites. It goes, not until their sin is filled up. So God had been patiently waiting, but at this point, God's going, okay, now the time has come where God's patience finally has reached its full extent. And then God now is bringing judgment. And I think it's important for us to understand. I think you read that verse and go, well, God hardened their hearts. What's up with that? God, why did God harden their hearts? It wasn't that God solidified their decision that they had already made. God goes, okay, that's what you want now. I'm actually going to solidify the things that you've already determined, that you're going to live a life in rebellion against me. God did that to Pharaoh. Remember Pharaoh? Pharaoh at first was, giving in, but every time he rejected Moses, it says that he hardened his heart, and then all of a sudden it says, and then the Lord hardened his heart. Because if that's the choice you want to make, you want to live a life in rebellion to God, that's fine. God will let you. And he'll pursue you, but there comes to a point where God says, okay, if that's what you want to do, man, now I'm going to solidify that for you. We find, and I'm going to ask you to look at Romans chapter 1. And I think, really signifying the days that you and I are living in. Romans chapter 1, what an incredible passage. Actually, let's go to verse 22. Actually, go up to verse 21. I mean, the whole chapter incredible. But look at verse 21. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore, watch this. There's the therefore. Man continues to go down this road, and finally God goes, okay, that's what you want to do. Therefore, God gave them up to uncleanness and the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and they worshiped and they served the creature rather than the Creator, who's blessed forever. Amen. And for this reason, watch this, God gave them up to their vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use of what is against nature. Likewise, the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burning in lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. Wow. He says, you know what? You want to continue down that road, man, and you want to continue to go down to the most perverse life you can live. He says, and God will say, all right, that's what you want to do. I'll solidify it, man. I'll give you up to it. Because God, in his grace and his mercy, man, has made a way for every one of us to be saved. But if you don't want to live a life of obedience and faith, God will go, all right, that's what you want to do. And I think here's the picture here. You look at all of the death and all the destruction and all of the demolition that had taken place, and you go, man, why would God allow that? It wasn't that God is hardening their hearts. It's that they had hardened their hearts, and then God gives them up to it, so that they do the things that they desire to do, and it does now every perversion, man. And the Canaanites were the ones who would offer up their children to Molech, man. They would put their little newborn babies, and they would have this little idol, their god, and they would take underneath their god, they would lift a hand out, and they would put a fire underneath the hands, and they would come to, it was burning red hot, man, from the metal, and then they would take their children, and they would place their children and offer it to Molech on the altar. And their children would scream. And then they would, dance around and scream as loud as they can just to drown out the voices of their babies that were being offered up. Vile. But once you give yourself over, man, to, immorality, then God goes, all right, now, you know what? You've crossed the line. And now because and you got to ask the question, man, in our society right now, man, how close are we to the line right now? Look what's going on in our society. How many millions of babies are being killed a year in our world? How much immorality, man, is rampant in our society right now? And you got to ask, where's the line where God finally? You think about every time judgments come. Think about when God destroyed the earth with the flood, is because violence was in the heart of man continually, and immorality, sexual depravity. And God goes, in order to save society, I got to destroy the world. And there's only 8 people that God spared so that they can repopulate the earth. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah, man, the sexual depravity that was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, and God had to do what? He had to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And then look at Canaan here, where God goes, you know what, we got, in order for, the culture to survive, we got to destroy the culture so that what? We can reestablish truth. And you wonder, how far gone is our culture right now before God finally says, okay, enough is enough. May 14th, I think it's next Monday, will be Israel's 70th birthday as a nation. All the promises of Ezekiel chapter 36, coming to pass, all the promises of the Old Testament coming to pass, as God had brought together a nation after almost 1,900 years of being dispersed upon the land, and then God brings them back into their own land again. And then for 70 years, man, they've been existing against all odds and against every reason, man, as the children of Israel have been brought into their own land. And then you're looking at all of the tension that's going on in the Middle East right now. Wouldn't it be ironic? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, man. The Lord would go, okay, man, 70 years are done. Whole generation's been there. Let's get on with the 70th week of Daniel and let's begin the tribulation. I mean, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Because that means we would get out of here like by next Monday. Anybody else in? I mean, you just look, it's incredible how many things are happening. And then you watch what's going on with, Russia, and you look what's going on with Iran, you look what's going on with Syria, you look what's going on with Lebanon, you look at what's going on with Turkey. And all of the things, man, that are happening, Iran's now saying they're going to bomb Israel. They've already attempted to this today, but you just look at, they're saying we're going to push them into the sea. Just all of the things happening. You're just like, man, you know what, God, at some point, God's going to say, okay, it's time, it's done. It's done. I'm going to take my bride to heaven, and then for 7 years, man, the wrath of God being poured out upon the whole world. The book of Revelation, from chapter 6 all the way to chapter 18, describe to us what those 7 years are going to look like. Unbelievable that God's already declared how he's going to pour out his wrath upon the world. And so we're watching all of these things in the children of Israel, and you realize, what? God got to the point where he said, okay, now it's time to do something. And you were living, I think we're on the brink of God saying, okay, it's time to do something. I really believe we're close. And then you and I got to ask, what am I going to live my life, man, for for, by faith and obedience, or I'm going to live my life in fear and rebellion. And that's really what it comes down to for all of us. How are we going to live our life, man? And then look at verse 21 as we wrap up the chapter. He says, and at that time Joshua came. He cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Dibber, from Anab, and all the mountains of Judah and all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. Anakim, what's the Anakim? The Anakim were the giants. And you know what's incredible is that these were the guys that brought fear to the children of Israel so that they didn't come into the promised land 38 years earlier. And the last victory that they have is against the Anakim. I love it because what happens, man, God was going to give them what more than they can handle. God was going to let their faith be built before they ever fought against the giants. They had to see all the other victories that God would bring, and then they go, man, you know what? The Anakin's nothing. Have you seen what God did? Have you seen God's faithfulness? Have you seen God wipe out all those enemies, even though there's as many as the sands of the seashore, with chariots and all of their armory? They didn't stand a chance against the Lord. Let's go fight those giants now. Goliath was one of the small ones. Goliath was 9'6". They're saying the Anakim were 10 to 11 foot. And they just weren't like, some of the basketball players, 7'2", and they look like skinny as can be. They can't even jump because their knees will break or something, right? They're not like those guys. These guys were like 9'6", 10'4", Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of guys. They look like The Rock. They're just... These guys were like monsters. They're in proportion to the size of their bodies. And, can you imagine we're going to go fight against those guys? No way. But by the time they get to this point, they said, you know what? Bring on the Anakim. These Anakim don't stand a chance against the Lord. I can't wait to see how God's going to take these guys out. And they go and, think about David and Goliath. The little David, this little runt of a kid, and he goes up against the giant 9'6" Goliath, and he goes up with 5 stones. He tried to go with all the armor, and I think it was the same picture. He tries to go in there with all of Saul's armor. He can't even walk, right? And he's got to go like, man, well, I can't fight with this stuff. Give me my stones. He takes 5 stones, and he's torn. And the giant goes, you send that little runt against me? You guys are crazy. I'm going to tear him apart, limb by limb. And what does David say? You come against me with all of your might, your power, your size, but I come against you in the name of the Lord. And I'm going to have your head for dinner tonight, buddy. Can you imagine how crazy that is? And I read all the commentators. The commentator says this, that the reason David took 5 stones is because Goliath had 4 brothers. I like that. The other giants. You want some? You want some of this? Just because David had a confidence in the Lord. And how much confidence do we have in the Lord to overcome our battles, our fears, our vices that you and I have to fight, man, in this world? How confident are we that God is the one who fights the battle for us? And I think really, that's the lesson in Joshua, is that you and I would learn to walk by faith as well. And that we would be able to take, man, all of those fears, man, even the Anakim, and be able to say, God, you are able to fight the battle if I'll just trust you. If I'll just obey you, if I'll just seek you. Look at verse 23, the last verse there. And so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said to Moses. And Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their division by their tribes. And the land, watch this, rested from war. They rested. Now, let me tell you, we're going to look at chapter 12, 13, and 14, all the way to 15. The next several chapters, we're going to look at the division of the land, and we're going to look at, all of the territory and the battles that they're still going to face. So he's not saying that they had rest from, any kind of battles that they were going to face, but the war had already been won. And let me tell you, Christian, the war has already been won. It was won on a cross 2,000 years ago. We still have battles. The battles are real. The battles are there. But the war has already been won. Now it's just a matter of, us walking by faith and taking the territory that God's given us so that what you and I can take what God has entrusted to us for his kingdom, for his glory. Because the war is over. It was defeated when Jesus offered up himself for the sins of the whole world. And it's a cool picture, man. Incredible. Father, we thank you so much for the word, God, that you've entrusted to us. And Lord, you said that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And I pray that our faith today, God, would be built, strengthened. Lord, any area that we haven't given over to you today, God, we would just give it to you. Any vice that still has a grip, Lord, in our life, Lord, today we would just say, God, I don't want that to rule me any longer. No addiction, no lust, nothing that would sway me, God, from following you. Today, God, would be a day where I finally just say, God, I'm done trying to do this on my own. And so, Father, I pray, God, that your Spirit would just work in us. Every doubt, every fear, God, would be brought to nothing today. That we would realize, God, that you're the victor, and that we can walk in confidence because of you. And just tonight, man, most of us here have already made a decision to follow the Lord. But there's still some battles in your life that you're needing God to intervene, and you haven't surrendered them tonight. There's some areas where you're still walking in fear and anxiety and just, I just haven't let go. And tonight, man, you know what? Here's what it is, guys. It's a matter of us coming and say, okay, God, I acknowledge that's what's going on. And I want to ask you to come in and to take those things from me. That's faith in action. That's responding when God's trying to pull something away, and we're going, no, I don't want to let go. But it's like, all right, God, I'll let go. But now, God, I need you to intervene. And maybe today, man, God's trying to take something. Some vice in your life, maybe some fear in your life, maybe some anxiety, maybe there's something you've been contemplating, man, some sin, and you just need to realize, you know what, I got to give up. Or maybe even there's addiction in your life, and God today, man, is trying to get your attention so that you would trust him and you would surrender. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, whatever it is, man, and God's trying to get your attention. And today, man, you can make a choice to say, God, I give. I give. And we're going to pray, and I'm going to ask that your eyes be closed, your head bowed, and we're going to pray. And if God is speaking to you tonight, man, I'm just going to ask that you would just acknowledge that. All right, God, I heard you. I want to give up that area that I haven't given up yet.